Hello, welcome to class number 4. Today we're going to look at the fictional space of a doll's house. Without bringing back necessarily the slide that I had prepared for the introduction, I'll just remind you what it is to look at the fictional space and what this class is going to be about. How do you look at fictional space? In two ways. First, from an analytical point of view that starts with and in the play. You look at locations, you look at architecture, you look at weather, you look at references, you look at anything that comes from the text. So it's like you're going into it in another depth or layer of text analysis. And then secondly, but it's not linear. So you look at one thing and then it informs the other. You do look at how the space behaves and what the space means metaphorically, symbolically. You look at what society is there, what is not there, what is visible, what is not, and so forth. So that's kind of what I want to do with you today. I want to kind of lead you through a little bit what I've done in, not as much in depth as I could, just for not keeping you here forever, but just, as an intro to looking at the space of the play. So what we do is we get back to our play, which for me, it's in this format right now. And as you can see, just even next to the main, the first page, I've drawn a little, not so beautiful drawing of the space that is described, because the number one rule is right now you pay extreme attention to stage directions and you take anything out of it that you can, of course. And so you kind of draw whatever space Ibsen wrote for us. The first stage direction takes a page, so there's a lot of good information in there. And it's very good. One thing I do is I actually write down the words that stand out when a space is described. It is a living room, so in a house. So apparently we are in front of a naturalistic type of space. We'll find out how it's not as naturalistic as it seems. It's not just, actually, nothing is. Everything that Ibsen chooses as a symbolic meaning in it. And we'll see how in a moment. But how interesting to read that the space is warm, well furnished with taste, with more taste than expense. We imagine it being a Victorian style, of course, because this was kind of the era of the time. So what do we have there? There is a room where we have 3 walls. The walls are important, especially not for themselves, but for what they hold in there, which is doors. Quite a big amount of doors, if you can think of it. So if you look at the space, you have the 3 walls. So it looks like a traditional theatrical space where the 4th wall is kept up, and it is indeed. It does have an area with a stove on stage right. There is a stove with a couple of chairs and a rocking chair. And on the other side, there is a table, which you can draw however you want. I think it's interesting to see when are these objects that exist, these pieces of furniture, when are they used and for what in the play? So, for example, I did draw a round table, and now I'm thinking it shouldn't be round at all. It actually should be a rectangular table. Longer even, so I'm changing it as we go. And this is kind of the process. I'm really going with you. It's not I have a whole analysis done. I kind of want to share you thoughts in process, because I think it's more interesting to enter a process than to come out with whatever solution. There is a piano in the middle, which is used first by Torvald and then by Dr. Rank for the tarantella. And then there are other various things. Something that jumped out at me was the fact that the floor is carpeted. So it's very soft. It's very warm. There's a fire in the stove. It's cozy. The word that I come out from looking at the space is comfort. I think comfort is very important. It's one of the things that keeps Nora asleep, if we want, or that keeps her thinking that this is the only space that she can live in, at least for now. Then something interesting that I mentioned, it's really in relation to doors. When you read the play, doors are omnipresent. There's always we are in this main room and always someone enters a space or exits a space and doors are opened and closed. The very first thing that happens in the play, of course, is the opening of the door and the entrance of Nora. The last thing that happens in the play is Nora's leaving and shutting the door, the last door, getting really out of the house. We get a sense that this is in an apartment building. In fact, they are one floor below from the Sternborgs, which is the family that invites them for the day after Christmas party. So they are perhaps on the second floor, first floor, somehow there are stairs going up. That's what we hear. And then there is a front door, a hall to get in. And here is the first set. So 2 doors are set in the back of the wall. And then along the 2 sides, right and the left, there still are other doors. So what I find interesting in here is it's a space that hides. It hides many other spaces that we little by little, we get to know what they are in a movement that really goes almost from stage left to stage right. It's interesting to see the movements inside the play. So stage left, what we have is we have a window looking out. Kind of looks like the only window, but like it's not, if you want. But there's definitely a window where Christine goes to when she's a little bit upset by Nora's talking about herself and her successes and her husband's successes. Then there is the door to the nursery. That's the place where the children live, when Anne-Marie, the nanny, lives. Then there is instead Helmer's study, which is in the back wall, like through the back wall, more stage left, before the piano. Then there is the hall, which is a door, stage right, still in the back wall. And then there is another door which goes along stage right. That door, for a long time, we don't know where it leads. Then eventually we discover that somehow it leads to a dining room and also to Nora's private rooms, and likely Torvald's too, because they both have rooms. Or, I mean, we don't know where it is. However, so I think at first it's very important to understand the physical space that Ibsen placed us in. This doesn't mean that that's what you're going to do with the play at all, but you have to go through these steps at first. So, as I mentioned, this space, so it's a living room. How interesting that what we are given to see, what is really visible in front of our eyes, it's not the intimate quarter of Nora. It's not the study of Torvald. It is the space where the people meet. It is actually the most public space in a house, if we want, the living room, the one that is just next to the hall, where people enter and wait to move into different rooms accordingly to whatever they have come to do. So it's a space that speaks for us a little bit about point of view. So the point of view maybe is not the intimate point of view of Nora. It's not Torvald's. It's not from. We don't look at things from the law point of view of his study, which is a little bit what he represents as well. We do not look at it from the nursery, from the children's point of view either. The point of view is very much the point of view of the audience that is looking onto a performance. There's a lot of elements that are meta-theatrical in this play. We'll talk about this more later, but many references are made to acting, play acting, performances, taking off costumes, moving into day clothes, and so forth. Yeah. Okay, so where was I? The doors, yeah. So talking about these doors again. What is interesting is that mostly the opening and closing of doors is accompanied by sound, by something specifically, which is a bell that rings. Almost always when someone comes in, there is a bell. Actually, the first thing that even we hear before the visual in the play, at the beginning of the play, we hear a bell, and then it's Nora entering. I find very interesting how bells are something that disrupt. They are in this play constantly. A little bit, they remind us of the inevitability of events, of life moving on, of the course of events that happens in the play. At the same time, makes me think how much a bell is meant to call, to wake up, to shake us and interrupt. They're an interruption from something that we were into. So little by little, all these bells are sort of a wake-up call, I think, for Nora and for other characters as well, but for Nora specifically. So as we look at sound and we speak about this bell, there's only a couple of times where the bell doesn't ring. There's just a faint knock at the door, and that's when Krogstad comes in, when Nora is alone after Dr. Rank and Torvald and Christine have left. So how his way of entering is not one that can be announced. And the other time is when the door is actually ajar and open, and it's again Krogstad coming in to meet Christine when in the evening when the other two are dancing at the party upstairs, simply. So this tells us something else. Like, it's always interesting to notice one element and what is the opposite of that. What are the exceptions? When the bell doesn't ring, what does that mean, for example? Who's coming in? From where are they coming in? At the same time as we're looking at sound, I'm going to open up just very quickly about the light aspect of the piece. So as we know, this piece happens over 3 days. It really happens on the morning of the 24th of December. In the morning, like it is winter, and we're talking about a town in Norway. Now you can look up and research both on Oslo and Bergen as cities. I think maybe Bergen. I'm really in between the two to take as inspiration and to kind of understand the space, the urban space at the time. But whichever we choose, maybe Oslo has a bit of a harsher winter than actually Bergen does. It's more of a climate that has to do with its place in the ocean, and Bergen is really it's kind of protected by the mountains, 7 mountains all around, and so it does not get very snowy, and snow melts quite quickly. While in a scene we hear that the kids have been playing snowballs. So anyway, whether it's Oslo or Bergen or whatever it is, what we know about Norway's winter is that it gets quite dark in winter. Not dissimilarly from here, if I can say. In the winter, the amount of light that we have in a day, it's 6 hours, no more. And in fact, they have supper at 5 p.m. at some point in the next day. And it's interesting to see how we start in the morning, and then at the end of Act 3, we are late at night. Maybe not so late, but at night. And the light slowly dims throughout the play. It's very interesting how when something, we were talking about waking up, but it's a waking up that needs somehow darkness to take away what is visible, what has been the decor, what has been the scenography that has always been there. So I find this very inspiring and interesting stuff. Okay, that's another element to just throw in there. Now, what spaces are not visible? And that's another interesting thing to see in this whole space. What's not visible to the eye is Torvald's study, every other room in the house, but also everything that is outside of the house. And for this play, it was called House of Dolls. I think it's very important, the parallel between whatever is meant to be the inside and what is the outside. So in the outside, what we do not see is the town. It is the bank exists there. Then there is this phantomatic, very interesting place called Olsen's Cafe, excuse me, not bar, it's a cafe, where Krogstad sits and waits. He waits. He's waiting that Torvald leaves the room to go in the house and speak with Nora, where he spies almost. What else do we not see? We don't see the Stenborg house. It's kind of, so that it's an outside as well. And I think it's important that we understand that it's a place where Nora goes on the outside to then come back in. And in a minute, we're going to talk about Nora's movements, in fact. What we don't see is the lodgings or the steamer that Christine takes to come to town. Her lodgings, Krogstad's own place, the countryside where he goes is far away. We don't no anything else. So all this, even, it belongs in there. Even Italy exists in the outside that we do not see. This is the work of putting together a little bit the universe of the play. What exists there? The distance Italy, the distance south of Italy, the heat, the warmth, the passion. What is that for this play? It's very important that thing exists somehow. Now, looking at the ins and out. So when we look at Nora, and what I mentioned is she's not, we don't see her in a nursery, we don't see her in a children's room, we don't see her in the kitchen. She's not so much the housekeeper or the mother for us in this play. I think she's really, the main look onto her is the housewife. So her relationship is with the house. She is almost always inside the house. In fact, Act 1 starts and she enters. Once she enters, she stays in. She's the last one in at the end of Act 1. Act 2 starts and she's in. She's the first one that we are with. And she's pacing, almost like an animal in a cage at this point, pacing nervously. And at the end of the play, we end again with her alone, while everybody else has gone into the dining room to start to have supper. At this point, between Act 2 and Act 3, she goes out. Where does she go? She goes just one floor above, inside another house, but in another living room, lightly, but a much larger one with an audience, with a bigger audience than she's been having, perhaps, up until now. And how interesting that instead, who is in at this point is Christine. Christine, who in this very moment decides to get back, or to get back in a sense, because she's never been a mother, but to tie herself to a new house. So she decides to take back onto her the task of being a wife and a mother of other children and housewife in general. While when Nora comes in, pretty soon she'll understand that she cannot be in anymore. And in fact, she will leave at the end. So what else is outside that we do not see inside? Nature. Nature is almost not part of this play. It feels like it's the divide between the main character, Nora, or every character, and one who and nature is quite wide. So who gets to nature? The children gets out a little bit in the winter. Then Krogstad goes to the countryside. But otherwise, there is the house, there is the town, and we have no sense of where nature is. Now, very specifically, I'm going to link this to the director's vision, of what I've spoken about in the last class, which is what interests me specifically, the awakening also of the savage nature that is linked to nature itself, to the relationship of a human being to nature, and to what that means for someone. And what I find very interesting is one detail. It's not true that there almost is a nature in this play, because in the very first scene, at the very beginning of the play, Nora comes in, and what comes in with her is a tree. She brings in what is going to be the Christmas tree, but what at the moment where it enters, it's a pine tree coming from a forest. So one thing that I'm going to look for when I'm going to talk to the director is to bring this element in and to try to mine onto where is this nature? Is this nature awakening with Nora? Is nature helping Nora awaken? Is the pine tree coming in the house serving something more symbolically than just being a Christmas tree? We can look at it in so many ways. She, in a moment of great anxiety after Krogstad has left, she starts dressing up the Christmas tree when Torvald is there and is questioning her on whether she spoke to Krogstad and promised him to intercede with her husband. So this action of covering up the tree, of putting lights and other things. When we look at a Christmas tree, we don't look at the tree, we look at the lights, generally at the costume of the tree a little bit. Then we find the tree again after Christmas Eve. It's very interesting, the words that actually, Mr. Ibsen chooses to describe the tree is disheveled. It's untidy. It is the tree himself with the remains of burned candles makes me think about the aftermath of a wild dance, of a ritual, of something. It can be seen in positive and negative way in many ways. So I think it's an image that is very pregnant with various meanings. So again, my question will be, one of the questions I have is, okay, there's a window, perhaps more than a window, perhaps many windows. What do we see through those windows? Can we actually see through the town onto woods? Not sure. Anyway, find an interesting direction, this one. At the same time, so as I speak of this other place, which is nature, which is kept away, which is maybe a bit darker, I cannot but think about Krogstad himself as being the only other character that lives in a space that is not completely under the sunlight, that is not like the other characters. The other characters kind of occupy a space in society and do not have secrets. Dr. Rank, okay, they have their own secrets, but not in the sense of they do not live in antichambre, in secondary rooms. They don't have secrets that are not acceptable by society. But he does, and he speaks of it. He speaks about, there's a bit of a societal geography where if we look at it, in the terms that Krogstad uses, he speaks of a ladder to go up. So if we look at it as a series of stores, a building store, of course, at the top we have ascending Torvald, who went from being a lawyer, which is a great position in society, to, although it's mentioned at some point that it's not such a secure position, but anyway, he goes to become a bank manager, which is very stable, very well looked at. And next to him, I think Dr. Rank, doctors are always considered, especially in this time right now, almost gods in our Western society especially. And then at a lower level, I think there is Nora, the housewife, that is not working necessarily. I think she has a better position than Christine, the woman who is alone and has to work. The widow is not, I think gets less value than a woman that is in the house having children, especially women that have no children. And then, so Nora, Christine, and then definitely Krogstad, who even speaks about the gutter, having been in the gutter, and saying that if he's going to go there again, he's going to take down Nora with him. There is another geography to this play, which is interesting to see. Now, where did I want to go with these things? I'm sorry, I'm just getting lost here. I wanted to continue to look at. So this is kind of a bit of an intro and an example on how you start looking at space. Then another work that I'm not going to lead you through because it's a bit petty for a class, but is to look at the actual internal movements of the characters in the space and how do they behave in this space. How do they behave in relationship to these doors who open? There's a real big tension between Nora, but anyone actually who is in the house, in the living room, when the bell rings. And so towards the hall and whomever comes in. Her relationship is with every other door, actually. She has a tension with Torvald's study, which at some point she locks even. There's a tension with the nursery where she shoves the children and says, do not bring them to me anymore. I cannot be in their company. There is, and then eventually there is this stage right door, which leads to her room. She has not been in her room. She has not gone back to her own intimate space to then when she comes out of it, she has taken her decision. Everything has changed. And she's then ready to leave in her own clothes. Just before she was about to leave with Torvald's cloak on her and with the veil, the black veil that she had to go and try to commit suicide, which she's stopped by Torvald in that moment. And then how interesting that that's not at all the end. Instead, she gets dressed up again, dressed up, and then she's ready to leave with her bags. Yeah. So that type of work, it's very interesting to see who is near the stove, when, how do they move in the space? Why does at some point the table that was stage left move center for act third? What is this piano signifying there at the end, and why is it used by Dr. Rank more than by Torvald at the moment of the tarantella that we see. It's much more important, and we see the tarantella than it actually happens upstairs. That's the pivotal, one of the most pivotal moments in the play. So when we look at a space, I'm also not going to get so much into research about what Norway looks like. And yet it is very important to know what the landscape is of the writer at the time that he wrote, and of the landscape of this play. And specifically, I think it's so very interesting to look at fjords, of course, and nature, and to look at these fjords are like valleys that have a bassin, how do you say, water, it's a lake or it's a river, in between steep mountains. And they're beautiful, they're gorgeous. Nature is actually overwhelmingly beautiful there, and powerful, extremely powerful. So the polarity between the comfy and warm household and that force of nature that exists outside, there are many waterfalls as well. I think it's something fertile for our reflection on space. Now, something that I wanted to do as well was to show you some images. I'm going to now get into sharing screen. The intro, before I show them to you, is that image search continues throughout. And these, you get now maybe to the point when you're starting to look at images that inspire you in relation to space. Now, what interests me here, as you know by now, it is this spiritual awakening that has to do with something larger than just the main character. And therefore, I made a search that brought me closer to inspirations that have to do with nature, both in terms of space as well as characters. There are so many animal references, of course, to Nora. She's spoken to be a skylark. And skylark, so very interesting to find out that a skylark is a symbol. I mean, every bird is almost symbolic, has a symbolic meaning. The symbol of the skylark is that it's the symbol of the joyous spirit of the divine. And then on page 56, we have Dr. Rank, who tells Nora, in the next fancy dress party, you're going to be dressed as the spirit of joy. Also very interesting to go and research every name that you find in a play. Like Nora is a very common name in Norway, in Germany, in Italy, and so forth. And it comes etymologically, it comes from honor, honora, and then Eleonora, and then there are many variations. But I found out also that in the Arabic language instead, Nora means nur, or nura, means fire, light, heat. And again, Dr. Rank at the end, Nora helps him to light his cigar, and he thanks her for having been a light. Of course, there's so much more to the subtext between Nora and Dr. Rank. It's really so beautifully written. I love this play. It's really good. So now I was talking about animals. Skylark, she's a dove. But towards the end of the play, the little bird, the singing bird, becomes a dove in the eyes of Torvald. And she's been a squirrel before. All little animals that do belong to nature, but right now are not. At least she's not. She lives instead in a house, as most of us do anyway. Another path for research at this point, for me personally, is looking into Norse mythology, looking into the Viking Age and so forth, and what existed in the background, in the paganism of the northern countries like Scandinavian countries. I'm not going to get into that, but this is something that definitely will nourish thoughts around space, and not just, will nourish the whole play and the directing of the play. Okay, so I'm going to show you just a few images. I'm going to share my screen. And I'm going to find my transport there. And I'm going to just start by looking at a few images of space, like actually of literally. Okay, maybe these images are not the greatest in terms of how big they are, but I just wanted to show you some that were through inspiration. If you can see this one, it's kind of a door to nature built in branches, in little branches. This for me is really the door that is opening for Nora, a door that was not there before, but that could kind of magically is coming together to manifest itself to her. And then I found a couple of images here that are very interesting in relationship, like the relationship between a house or walls or a space and the surrounding nature that exists around, and the presence of water, which is overwhelming in Norway. It's also so pregnant with meaning and with symbol. Of course, water, anything that is water, is the emotional depth of the psychic life of a person. And so this one as well, I found this image very interesting. From inside, looking from the darkness and from inside onto a land of freedom, and a beautiful land where sky and water mix together. There, I don't think I need to show you the last one. This is actually, it's very small, but it's one of the places very close to Oslo. It's actually the railway that goes from Oslo to another city in Norway. But just to see the green of the forest and the presence of the mountains in the back and the torrential waters. It's quite inspiring and beautiful. Then what I wanted to show you, coming back to this, is a series of images that really are more fitting me in terms of space. I would start showing these images to a designer, to my designer. I will actually. So here we go. This is actually a series of rooms. These images are not meant to be specific, like very concrete inspirations, but it's a reflection on the space. What happens in this play? What if there is a true explosion for Nora? Or for Torvald, or for anyone really in the play, but mostly for those two, where their world, their decor, literally their scenography, is exploding, as you can see. And there's this one, which I find very, very inspiring, of an almost Ophelia in her own living room, indeed, kind of having drowned, perhaps, or thinking of it. I'm not going to comment that so much, because you yourself see what these are. This one is again very small. Apologies. I hope you can see it. I'm liking, of course, these masks. These had pieces of animals onto a perfect husband and a perfect wife sitting there. Not just a perfect wife. There's more to this, of course. But how interesting it is. The wolf and the gazelle. This makes me think a lot about the scene when Torvald comes in with Nora from the dance, and he's been very turned on by her dance, of course. This is another Louise Bourgeois work, and it's as you can see, it's kind of a body of a woman coming out of the tapisserie of the walls. I'm laughing, but I shouldn't be. And there are other kind of metamorphosized pieces in the room that hints maybe at past souls having lived and died in there. Again, there's a door. It says 202, and yet we don't see outside. We just see inside. Almost there's no, and the door opens to us, but not to these bodies in the room. And another one for space this is another artist. I'm sorry, I can't actually quote the name right now. But it's another of those. This is a female's room. It's a woman's room that has been torn apart, and somehow something like this must be happening for Nora at some deeper level. Then what I also found interesting are some images that really speaks of birds that relate Nora or a female body to feathers and birds and fabric that looks more belonging to the savage world. Or the opposite, like this one. It's very telling as well. And finally, I think we have, this is also kind of a beautiful image. Anyway, the last, then at this point, even though we're never talking about costumes, this is not a costume research actually, it's just a small search of things that are in the text specifically. And it is about the fisher girl, the Neapolitan fisher girl, the costume that Nora is supposed to wear for the dance for the Tarantella. And what is interesting is in this type of images is to see that the fisher girl was in the water, so her dress, her skirt had to be lifted. See how it's actually pulled up. So it showed skin, more skin. It's an image of sensuality. And especially, I want to show you this one to you. This is even more like showing you what, you know, what this kind of inspiration was, it could have been in relation to Nor. There. All right, so at this point, kind of, this is a bit it for this class. You please continue to reflect and to search through the text. This is, of course, some of the things that I've seen, but each one of you who's working in the script must have noticed and analyzed other elements and found other things that are interesting in relation to your vision, because eventually at this point, that funnel that we've worked in the directors, in positioning you as a director, is the one that keeps leading you towards the next stages. So we do not reopen everything up. Just to give you an example, there's a whole other interesting interpretation that could be taking as a main theme, women as dolls, for example. There is so much about that, and women that, that is a value that still exists in our culture. If you think of anyone from Paris Hilton, like rich daughters of big businessmen, the idea of being daddy's daughter, of not having to work because you have a lot of money, there is so much to be going towards, but this is not what interests me right now. So you keep it, these things exist in the back, they will feed or not eventually your direction, but what you want to keep on is the light of the lighthouse that is your personal interest in the play. And then from there you start finding new things that can lead you to think, okay, if I have this tree, what tree is it? Do I want a tree? Is it something else? Do I want a whole forest outside of the house? Is it a house? Is it not a house? At this point, you're not making a set. This is the most important thing. You're still deepening your understanding of the fictional space that exists and that emerges from the play. I'm looking forward to seeing you on a Friday with question and reflections, and I'm going to wish you a very good week ahead. Goodbye.